Okay, we got everybody here. Then we've got the committee, which is Brittany. Brittany's here. Julie's here. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm whispering because we're going to the library and sound is an issue. Exactly. Very well. I'm setting you up for that. Hope everybody had a nice little break. Good afternoon again. Welcome back to the afternoon activities here for thesis reviews at University of Maryland. We have 2 more days of thesis reviews coming up tomorrow and Friday. Make sure you tune in or come down and hang out. Some good things going on. Today we have joining us as guest reviewers. Again, for those of you that weren't here in the morning, I'll just reintroduce people. Adam Bresnick, who's back here. Alec Deary, who's in the front row. Chris Elcock, who's also in the front row. Sitting next to him is Tom Jester over here. Puts his hand up. Nuni Reitig over here. And Susan Salisbury right over there. And if you want to know more about them, there are QR codes strategically. I thought I was being pretty, high tech and figuring out how to do a QR code that are links to this program. And I don't think Professor Bell knows how to do those kind of things. So we're so competitive. Anyhow, this afternoon we have 2 thesis presentations. And then at the very end, a little mid-review wrap up, because tomorrow I don't have any choice in this. I have to go to Italy. I won't be here Thursday and Friday, but I wanted to send off at least the students that were part of my cohort with a bit of a message. So just don't rush away at the very end. So Sarah Jane Graven is going to talk about soundscapes. And her committee was Brittany Williams, right here, and Julie Gabarelli, right there. How is that? Mi dispiace, ma è difficile oggi. It was the Korean food I just had. The spiciness of the Korean food has my face all like this. Gabrielli, Julie Gabrielli, anche io, as part of the committee. Go ahead, Sarah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I hope everybody had a nice lunch. Good. I wanted to take a few seconds to thank people, my family and friends. Thank you. I wouldn't be able to do this without you all. My cohort, how fantastic. I'm so excited and proud of us. My mentor, Amy Upton, my committee, Julie Gabrielli and Brian Kelly, thank you. And my chair, Brittany Williams, for your guidance and support. It has really been a pleasure. All right, thank you. Hello. This thesis is rooted in my love for people and culture and travel, with initial roots starting from my time studying abroad in Finland and really noticing how differently the Finnish culture integrates children and family into life, into civic life, and how differently it is done in the US, where we begin to see that the US is one of only 6 countries in the world that don't have a federally mandated paid parental leave policy. And with that being said, parents, guardians are forced to find childcare, which is unaffordable. And this thesis is focused on a site in Kentucky, as Brian has mentioned, because literacy rates are low and poverty rates are high. We can see here that Kentucky childcare is actually on the lower average side across the nation, but comparing that to cost of living, median family income, only 27.3% of families in Kentucky can afford childcare. So with that comparison, I also began to notice, I think, that the built environment has perpetrated this hostility towards children and families by being out of scale to children and creating spaces where children are expected to act as adults and reinforcing this phenomenon that children should be seen and not heard. But what if that were different? This thesis asks, how might we reimagine the design process and put acoustics at the center to integrate children and families into civic life? This thesis will test how acoustic analysis can be used as a design driver, as a decision maker throughout the process to create environments that are comfortable and inviting to children and families and in turn, all people. I mentioned that we are in Kentucky because literacy rates are low and poverty rates are high. Nearly 25% of Kentucky adults read below a third grade reading level. And Kentucky is the fourth most impoverished state in the US. So where in Kentucky? We're actually focusing on the largest city in Kentucky, this city. Can anybody pronounce this city? That's right. We're in Louisville, Kentucky.
I can pronounce it.
Yeah, you can, after a year with me. If you ever meet a fellow Louisvillian, they will be impressed and thank you for your pronunciation. So Louisville is the largest city in Kentucky, is just below the Ohio River. Indiana, Jeffersonville, Indiana is just north. This thesis will be in a neighborhood west of Louisville, but in Metro Louisville, called Portland. We're getting a lot of city names and learning, but the neighborhood is Portland. The area is single-family home or residential dominated, but is surrounded by this industrial cap, the purple color around. The site is a red outline here. Within Portland, the site that has been selected is around a lot of neighborhood assets, including community centers, schools. There's an existing Portland library. It's about 4,000 square feet. It's quite small and outdated. But Portland as a neighborhood and as a community has fallen into some disrepair, lost some character, especially after this image here, middle image, is from a flood in 1937, and the community was really, has really struggled to rebuild. So this site, spoken about, is just adjacent to Interstate 64, I-64, that was constructed in 1976 and really reinforced this idea of disconnecting Portland from Metro downtown Louisville. It's known and referred to as a national truck network, which really means it prioritizes heavy vehicular traffic and is incredibly loud adjacent to the site. The site has existing structures, existing buildings there that are either abandoned or have fire damage or, and the site is incredibly flat. It's just an asphalt plot. Adjacent to the site here is important to note that there's family health centers, which is a health center that provides free or low-cost healthcare to the impoverished or unhoused communities within Louisville. It's good to know that there is a community of unhoused individuals that exist in or around the site. To further understand the neighborhood, talking to community members, hearing their voices and checking out community meeting notes, finding that community members desire more educational facilities. They highlight some early access education, places for GED programs. So this thesis proposes a 30,000 square foot library with design decisions driven by the acoustics on the site and within the building. I've mentioned this I-64 highway is really a spaghetti-ness of highway adjacent to the site. To begin the acoustic analysis design process, I spent time on the site with a sound meter capturing 13 decibel measurements around the site to really understand the soundscape and create an existing site profile, sound profile. And I understood that the loudest portion of the site is the edge nearest the highway. Makes sense. First move was increasing the density of the vegetation near the edge of the site by the highway. and placing the building in the middle of the site to further mitigate the sound from the highway to the site and interior. Knowing the zoning of the sound profile of the site, placing outdoor activities and assets became clear. For example, the butterfly garden, a place of peace and serenity, reprieve, is placed in the quietest corner of the site, where the teen court is placed behind the building in a more animated, active sound profile along the site. This same practice was used when moving to the interior design of the building, where three typical interior wall sections were used. Only changes here were distance of studs and so increasing insulation, and then a resilient channel on typical wall 1, the highest STC. With that, creating sound profiles of interior program, highs and lows of decibel measurements found from just research and experiencing other libraries around, pulling the decision for typical wall from the high, and so labeling what rooms, what spaces need the interior wall type. And not all of these spaces have 4 walls, but it's important to note what is necessary. Moving into the building, placing these rooms along a spine, level 1 and level 2, you can see the spine here, is a transition point from the side closest to the highway and the more open side near the neighborhood. This spine has a joint in the middle that cranks the building 25 degrees in relation to the site angle as well. So then placing each room with the typical wall, we get to see typical wall 3 and then 2 and then 1, and organizing the spaces and the program along the spine. We see that the spine here creates louder spaces beyond and open spaces in front. So the spine drives where the program is organized. So seeing how this design was implemented into different spaces, a view taken from the Children's Plaza, actually looking towards the Children's Library. Here, over here too. There's a seamless connection, doors opening directly to the Children's Plaza. And then the adult reading room above, there's a porch or a patio space where it actually acts as like a buffer of air from the plaza to the adult reading room, but also parents or adults can be on the patio to have an audible and visual connection to the plaza, the Children's Plaza. Moving into the children's reading room, creating spaces, this perspective is taken from 3'6", a child's height, so it might be disorienting at first, but viewing the mezzanine or the children's den below as a way to confine sound and space, and placing a reading area above the den to place importance on if there's a story time or an active time in the reading room. More so, or moving to another view, looking at the exterior of the building and the butterfly garden, so the peaceful, like quiet space around here, and viewing the library through the entrance, beginning to see how people can move through the open lawn, some horizontal louvers on the south side, and this spine that I've spoken about really separates the building from the programmed closed room side and the more open space towards the neighborhood. The spine will take you to the end into this open family room space. In this view, we begin to see the structure change from this soft wood, mass timber, into a gray structure beyond concrete, ICF, insulated concrete form structure. So the library is constructed of 2 main construction systems. In response to the sound on the site, the back of the building nearest the highway is constructed of ICF or insulated concrete form. And near the neighborhood is mass timber, which is going to be the post and beam structure, a little bit more light and airy, and will allow, you can look at this, the structure to be more glazing and open. How the ICF and the mass timber are treated on the exterior is different as well. So the ICF as being a much more solid mass is covered with brick, and the mass timber and hemp block, actually exterior, is covered with standing seam metal to allow for a lot more glazing to happen and continue throughout the facade. Looking at this again, we see the ICF beyond and the mass timber near the neighborhood. And then this introduces a blue cylinder in the middle. Here we begin to see that from an entrance from the rear, and the brick structure, more of like an institutional style. The spherical atrium is all glazing. It's very much a different treatment from the ICF structure and the mass timber, very porous. The intent is to be reminiscent of other civic buildings like Stockholm Public Library or Senjan Salo Town Hall, and really have a different treatment to this moment in the library. Within the atrium, it's a stair atrium. It moves people throughout the building, and it's actually the only space in the library that has a third level. This is the highest point in the library. You can view the entire neighborhood, the entire site, and even views to downtown. So this thesis has reoriented the design process to put acoustics at the center, and create spaces for children and families, and really for all people to be comfortable and feel invited in this space.
So I find this to be a very thorough presentation, and I appreciate that you've sort of explored a lot of different things and followed through on your thoughts. One thing I'm wondering about, did you explore any acoustic treatments within the building for like sound reflection and absorption and things like that? Is that something that you can talk a little bit about?
It is, yes, definitely. I actually had material swatches I should have brought over, but a lot of the walls and the spaces inside the building will be treated with different acoustic wall panels. I have some like softer textured panels. Others are like just grooved wood panels with acoustic backing behind. Definitely considered, and depending on the spaces and what type of sound absorption is needed.
Were there any spaces that you were going for more sound reflection to actually amplify the space and create character through that?
I think that this is an interesting thought process that I had of what I identified as good sound versus bad sound within the building, with the portion of the building facing the neighborhood, the mass timber structure filtering the sound versus the ICF screening the sound. What sound would be able to come in? I think of a small section through the cafe space and the teen space is very much open. Sound can flow throughout this like gabled volume because the sound in the program allowed for it. It wasn't a space that required or asked for sound buffer and barrier.
I mean, I think it's really interesting, kind of the idea of doing this study. And I think you're certainly doing some like technical things that I think make a lot of sense. I guess the one thing like that I'm struggling a little bit with is the massing, the kind of overall massing, and just how it feels, once again, like it feels like there's maybe a few too many moves, or one or two too many moves. And I think it's interesting, as I was looking at your process, and there's this sketch right here, which doesn't have the little tower on it. I don't know, there's something about that that feels more compelling to me, that you have kind of 3 bars that are connected by a lower bar with a green roof on it. And it's basically 2 elements that you use the kind of shifting of one as hierarchy. And it's very simple. I feel like the way you referred to the tower and the precedence, like it wasn't all that compelling, like the one example of the turret is a, big volume space in a building. And then the Sanyat Salo is not a turret at all. It's not a circle at all. So again, sometimes I think, when you get into, there's a lot going on, And I think the acoustics part matters. And I think the way that you've done these two buildings that slip into each other is interesting. But it feels like there's probably one or too many pieces to the puzzle.
I also really appreciate all of the graphics and the materials and getting into the plants. I'm also kind of questioning, for me, it's not so much the exterior massing and the narrative of the building with the joint. It's more the interior, like I feel like there's a disconnect with the shell of the building and then its contents. In some areas, I think it works better than others. I really like that idea of exploring the different scales, like for the child spaces and the kind of indoor-outdoor spaces that connect with the whole building structure. But then when you get into dividing the smaller rooms, kind of those programmatic spaces, and then you have this kind of like unused space, or like it's like a floating volume, then I wonder, like, is this a missed opportunity? Because like the precedent buildings, like the Asplund Library in Stockholm is all about like that the interior is informed by the whole exterior, and you can feel the whole structure, the way that the books are laid out and everything.
Right.
And then one more thing, the playground, I would like to see that designed like architecturally and not just like pieces that were alien.
Yeah. I tried, well, let's see, with the void spaces, organizing the program was like pulling spaces from the spine. Are you saying the void above or, okay, yeah. Like where that.
The design wasn't
Through out the gable bars. Sorry.
because you can, have the rationale of pulling it, but why?
Yeah,
Like how does it make sense
yeah.
to the building?
I really used the ICF structure that is beyond as intended to block the highway sound and really be the larger mass with the mass timber embedded within, so that it's acting as a buffer from the sound to the spaces that are more porous, more open with the ICF structure. I think that was the intent of the pole in the smaller mass timber structure.
Can I?
Okay. Sorry. Within.
Also, like, I guess the question is like, why do a whole building for that when you could just put up like a sound barrier? If it is the architecture, then shouldn't it be integrated
With like a sound
with the
barrier
program?
of, from end to end.
No, I meant like, what's your argument for making it the building versus a sound barrier, like a wall on a highway or something?
Yeah, I was looking into that. I think that there's benefits to that, and I considered it on the edge of the site. From what I've seen, the barrier really blocks the sound directly from the highway, but moves it over and through into the neighborhood. The intent here was to really increase that vegetative buffer to stop and block the sound and have the building act in that same way and respond to it as a buffer to the site and to the library, but also to the neighborhood.
Did you use one of your precedents, the building at Vitra of Herzog and de Meuron?
No.
I would take a look at that because it uses a similar geometry of like the shed that's geometric and extruded, but inside it's there's multi-levels and it's inhabited at different volumes. So it might be interesting to take a look at.
Sarah, Sarah Jane, forgive me, Sarah Jane, thank you for correcting me. Sarah Jane, so there's a question coming. So I like that. What I find interesting very off the top is that the building is heavy in the back, sort of lighter in the front, and heavy in the back, meaning that clearly you're shielding and you're trying to solve an acoustical problem. I get it. Architecturally, we can begin to see that. How does that translate into like how the plan is organized? And I'm seated too far away, and I didn't know if I could just get up and interrupt your presentation and start looking at spaces, but I figured I'd take this time for maybe you can explain. Is there some logic to the differentiation in the architecture expression? Does that reflect itself in the plan? Like what's in the front, in the light part, and what's in the heavy part? Maybe you could run that.
Sure. I think
Run
that's
through
something
that
that would
for us.
be helpful is looking at the just
Yeah,
program layout.
yeah, after that.
So the
You can just tell us, like, yeah.
well, looking at the rooms, I think something that helped me organize the floor plan was finding the range of decibels within the spaces. So I actually spent time in a variety of libraries around DC and did the same decibel measurement capture and found the ideal range within these spaces. And that informed my low and high. And so the spaces with the highest decibel levels, like the, let's see, loading, waste, and maker spaces are placed within the ICF structure to have it act, let's see, the maker space and lending library and loading service beyond, have it embedded into the soundproofing mass structure. And then lighter spaces programmatically were placed in the mass timber.
Okay, so your
structure.
quieter spaces are the spaces that generate or require more quiet are placed on the lower side, the side to the bottom of the plan.
Yes,
Okay,
with connection, with priority to connection to outdoor spaces.
Right.
So the children's reading room is placed in the mass timber, but is connected to the children's plaza on the site.
all right. The other question I have is that there's a view of the rear entrance, which is, I guess, where people are, based on the neighborhood, a lot of people will probably be arriving by car. So they're parking in the parking spaces there. And then the view from the main entrance, where's the view of the main entrance from the walkers?
This would be the view from the main entrance,
Okay.
but the path would be
There you go, I see.
the other
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah, so that, the rear entrance view, just feels a bit apologetic, right? To me, I think you probably could have, amplified that just a bit much. I mean, this is just based on how you've presented the neighborhood. I get it. It kind of responds to the proportions and how the fenestration is on the arrival piece, but it just, I don't know, it just feels a little, it didn't need to be that quiet. But other than that, the building, for now, the building, it definitely reads like if it's trying to respond to two different types of conditions and trying to be more protective or absorptive in the rear than it is in the front. I mean, that comes through in the architecture. And I love the fact that you even spent time to try to choose vegetation and understand the species that might work in the area. So is there anything else you can say? Like, I know it's located in Kentucky. Is there a reason for that? Is the turret supposed to be a barrel? Like, is there anything, for the circular form? Maybe you can
Sure.
respond to, and I'll pass off.
Sure. Just while you were speaking about the like rear entrance not being too quiet or too closed off, with the ICF only using punched windows and really creating that like differentiation from the mass timber, I think that it could include more windows into the spaces. but that was the intent of really showing that difference. And the forms, the gable is inspired from the neighborhood really, within the space. Also, I really wanted to pull the Kentucky barn-esque form as well. I think that adapted, but the atrium stair could be kind of like a silo look style reminiscent of Kentucky as well.
I just wanted to say I really appreciate the graphics and even the clarity of your presentation, introducing the project. A couple of points. I think I agree with Alec a little bit about the tower. I feel like it adds interest to the massing, but I think the massing alone can be kind of carried the day perhaps. And I really appreciate it feels comfortable. I think, and one other issue with that is you just mentioned the third floor is the place to see the city or really have to use, but it's also not accessible. So it'd be a little tricky to, if it's,
Yeah.
you can't get up there. If
It's only the stair,
on an
yes.
elevator. Wanted to just comment about the, I think back to Tony's point about the liner and kind of the expression on the interior. I feel like the interiors are a little bit less developed. And I think I appreciate the exploration with the acoustics and but it feels a little bit like that was driving a lot of your decision making. I mean, just really the placement of program. And I wonder, it's almost like you want to ask yourself, where's the ductwork going to go? I mean, kind of didn't have to think too much about that, but if you thought more about how these spaces can come through the volume and what the relationships are, maybe it's that there's servant and service spaces where, back to the Luke Kahn idea of really kind of figuring out how to do that and express it, and where you might need to have some exposed mechanical or something. So I think there's a few places there. Are those the stacks for the library books on the second floor?
Above, yes.
Yeah.
Here.
Those are really tall stacks. When you do libraries today, they tend to be,
Small, yeah.
I mean, it's not, yeah, you definitely need so
Yeah.
keep those in mind.
It's a beautifully drawn and designed thesis, Sarah Jane. And there's just a couple drawings I want to comment on. One, Sarah Jane helped in the competition studio last year and took some competition wins also. I would put that axon that's in the lower corner closer to the beginning of how people are going to read the project. It kind of tells the whole story. Couple design comments. The idea of the ICF and the thicker wall on the north and louder side, it's really kind of nicely drawn in that structural axon. And I wish the idea of slipping one system through or out of another system were designed kind of in a clearer way in this cross perspective at the bottom. Like the stepped gable makes sense on the north end, but I would get rid of the stepped gable in the midpoint and really let that be shown as slipping out of the form on the north side. But I also want to back up and talk about your process. There's 2 or 3 drawings kind of at the top in the center that remind me so much of Ralph Erskine's Biker Wall. Now, he was the best UK architect that practiced most of his life in Scandinavia. We didn't get quite back to the UK, or we didn't see Sweden, most of the stuff he did in his career, but the Biker Wall has a very similar site and similar issues with sound next to a huge highway. And so he put up a large wall like those early schemes showed, and then clustered close to the lee of the wall, the smaller buildings that were protected by the sound. And where it ended up, it's harder for me to buy the argument that the form is helping with the sound than some of maybe those earlier studies. But it's a very nice project. Thank you.
Sarah, Jane. I agree with Peter. It's beautifully drawn and very nicely conceived. It's an interesting sort of artifice about this. The sound is real, right? But it drives a certain artifice about the project, which is kind of interesting, you know, because there's other systems you could use to solve the acoustic problem. Somebody set a sound wall, maybe that's certainly something people have used in various places. But this gave you a kind of hook on the project, which is interesting to explore these two structural systems and the efficacy of each and the spatial implications of each and stuff. And I think that's fine. I mean, it's great. You know, I think that's what people should do. And, you know, to a certain degree, much of architecture is artifice. It's what we as individuals, you know, want to sort of put forward as ideas. There's nothing given or nothing necessarily scientifically, you know, basic about any idea. It's all sort of a kind of will that we put upon a problem. So I find that really interesting. I find those scales of consideration to be really good to get into the whole questions of the wall assembly and the sound transmission properties related to the program and things. I have two concerns. One is for a real library, I just don't think there's enough stacks in there. You know, I think you'd probably have 3 times as many as you're showing there for a public library. And so that would be something to think about. The second thing has more to do with compositional questions. You know, these forms are very powerful, and you selected them for a lot of very good reasons, either residential forms of those kind of buildings that are nearby or, you know, sort of agricultural buildings and things. That's great, that's fine. And they add a very clear distinction to the character of this place, which I think you certainly have made a lot of hay here. I think, though, one question I have is the spatial implication of this kind of box of space created by these shapes. And when I look at the plans, I sort of end up wondering if more could have been done to sort of understand the basic implication of that space and how one intervenes in it. And where I end up looking is in, you know, I see this line across here, which is the line between that type and this type. And I get over here and it kind of sort of goes away and it's asymmetrical, and I get a column standing here by itself. And it just makes me wonder, could any of this have been organized so that it was clearer that it emanated from a large kind of volume that sort of went in this direction inside the building and stuff? In which case, I know these only go up part way and things. It just makes me wonder, given your sort of premise of these two temple volumes intersecting each other, isn't there a spatial sort of thing about that one could appreciate much more profoundly? You know, because I think there's much to admire about this project and things. That leaves me a little bit lacking about how you take the basic thing you set up for yourself, which are these two things doing that, and how it begins to realize itself inside the building.
So pulling, like, pull
Well,
program.
even organizing it in a way so that maybe even that transition was more apparent there, or even if you had a solid inserted so you could begin to understand that space as something, you know, you could still separate it with glass and stuff if you felt acoustically you needed to do that. But I think there's ways this program could have been organized to do that. This space I find a little bit sort of, I'd like to put that more into this space, so I come here and I get all of that and maybe pack that stuff a little bit better, so that the big room where the adults are going to go hang out has a kind of grander to it that is appropriate for what goes on in those sorts, or what should go on in those sorts of things and stuff. And in the same way you sort of handled that and you started to handle that.
Right, opening that up.
Thank you, Sarah, Jane.
Yeah, really impressive thesis, Sarah Jane, and I'm intrigued that it's a thesis fundamentally about a building system, and that sound is a building system. And I guess my thoughts are, could that do more work for you in generating the form of the building? I love that you're inspired by the barns and silos and local towns. You can do that by either taking the massing, or you can do it in a more abstract way by setting up an abstract partie that's based on that. Take the idea of a silo and a barn and just have that be a very loose partie, and then and then let the actual solids derive from your sonic architecture. And some buddies and I went down to Memphis and Muscle Shoals a few years ago and visited a bunch of music studios, Sun, Stax, all the great ones. And there's a wonderful tectonics about the studio. A lot of them are retrofitted, and it just creates a very evocative kind of language. And it just doesn't seem that the building is expressing that aspect of the thesis as much as it could be.
I wanted to commend several aspects of the thesis, the graphics and the fact that you drew your own trees. I think is really great. And I had there's a woman, Margaret Sullivan, who runs a studio from New York, and she's like the East Coast expert on libraries. And she says that libraries in the 21st century are the last bastion of democracy, where the two user groups are children and homeless. And that's something which I don't think you've touched on, and maybe it's not an issue in this part.
I definitely have considered that. The two main users of public library are the unhoused and children, especially with the site adjacent serving the unhoused population.
I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Sure. I think the spaces that I've created for unhoused populations are focusing in creating this media center, this media space for access to laptops, job applications, resumes, and things like that. And creating areas of reprieve on the site as well to engage with the adjacent program as well.
First of all, it's great design, and I really like the facade and how you come up with the detailed drawings and constructability. I think that's all good. I would like to give you some suggestion about how to make rationale for this building to like as seen as seriously thought about the acoustics. So it's good that you try to like block the sound and the noise coming from the highway by having some vegetation. So that's the first step. First, you need to reduce the decibel into like acceptable range. And once that noise enters your building, now it's time to design the acoustic in the building. So one of the main ways to do that is not controlling the intensity, which is you mentioned about decibel, but there's another way of measure the acoustic comfort is the reverberation time. So how fast the noise disappears. So depending on the space program, there are certain criteria for that. So once you look into that information, then you will be able to rearrange your layout of your space program. And then also you can provide better rationale for designing acoustic comfort for each spaces. And one way to control the reverberation time is changing the material types, so which has a higher absorbance, as well as make it really rough surfaces, which will kind of provide some echoes into the spaces. So there is one good precedent in JF Kennedy Center. So they opened up the recently the expansion building, and they made surface really roughly with the plasterboard as if the climb of the rock. So it remains the sound much longer period, so that people try to feel more about the musics. So depending on how you make it roughness and materiality, you can control that really easily. So that's one of my suggestions, how you improve your rationale for the acoustics.
The reverberation time and changing materiality, the flooring is a cork flooring to kind of buffer that like impact noise and reverberation time within the mass timber structure facing the neighborhood with a concrete flooring in the ICF structure. So having the different change of materials to catch that noise is there. I think that it could study the reverberation time from the highway and from that noise.
Sometimes complete silent is not good,
Mhm.
and you know that, right?
Mhm.
Some white noise helps you to more concentrate.
Right.
So consider that as well. Yeah.
I think the scale of consideration here, from the urban design to the neighborhood, to the detail, to understanding the properties and characteristics of materials as you apply them, is really great and not often seen in a thesis. And I think you're to be commended for that. Not to mention having to design a civic building in a pretty fragile context where there's very small buildings and you don't want to overpower them. But at the same time, you've embraced the idea that it can't just simply be a residential scale. It has to be something that has more legibility as a civic building. And I think that's really important. The, the care also, I think, with which the exterior spaces have been thought about, as somebody said, library, I think Adam said libraries today are very different than what they used to be. And that is true. There are more community spaces, there's more meeting spaces. A lot of them double as community centers. I know one I did doubled as a community center as well as a library because the neighborhood didn't have a community center. And those sorts of things, in a way, what they're becoming are places where the more things that happen there, the more important they become to a community. You know, so the more kind of exterior and interior program things that reside in all of this it becomes more valuable to the place. And then I think overlaying that with this sort of technological question of these two kinds of building systems and how do they solve a very specific problem to this site, which wouldn't exist if it was a block away. You know, I mean, if it was a block away, it would be a very different kind of building, it seems to me. It's sort of fun because then it basically says, yes, I'm making a building that looks like it would be at home in this Louisville neighborhood, but at the same time, I'm recognizing that this specific site has challenges that I can use to make a very specific architecture for this place, which I think is kind of a really good way to leave architecture school, that there are kind of, you know, general things that we learn that we can apply to most places, but then there are very specific things that make architecture have more meaning, you know, no matter what the program is. And I think if there's anything I think somebody ought to take away from a thesis kind of experience, I think that's one of them. It's got to be one of them, you know.
I wanted to add to that a little bit. I mean, I think the fact that you were kind of drawing wall sections and things like in the very beginning is commendable. I also kind of vaguely heard you say you wanted to run back and grab some samples. I mean, I think that's something I kind of think back on being in school. And now that we do it all the time in practice, you know, as soon as you start thinking about something, you just order samples, you know, and you get samples and you think about them and you have them at your desk. And I think that is a skill too. So like, I think that's the part of this that's the most interesting to me. The most resolved is just, and maybe it's not resolved, but it's like the point of departure for you of like thinking about the materials and the care of the space that you're in and the ceilings and the floors. You know, that's something that, you know, I think a lot of times we get super caught up in form and diagram and things which are important, but you know, as a practicing architect, like how people feel in the space and the materials of the space are just as important.
Actually, just another question. It looks like you've studied lighting in your spaces also. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. With the building and most of the glazing oriented on the southern facade, horizontal louvers were needed to block that and control that. I did study the building in Sapphira and see how it would work like energy wise. We can see that the southern facade is still lit more so than the ICF side. Makes sense. And really this was a helpful way for me to know with the multiple massings, with the glazing on the southern facade, what was needed to mitigate that, to create a sustainable building.
And then similar to your exploration with acoustics on the interior, were you particularly looking for certain spaces to be brighter or darker than others? Was that part of the character that you were looking at?
For sure. I think that that was embedded with laying out the floor plan as well, and creating a very light visibility sense in the mass timber, creating or placing the children's reading room with lots of glazing and lots of light. Same with the cafe and having this very light, seamless connection to a covered patio cafe as well. And using windows and lightness and glazing as a connection to the outdoors in the site.
So prior to collaborating with Sarah Jane on her thesis project, I had the pleasure of having her in Architecture 600, and also as one of our research assistants last summer to look at AI explorations in architectural pedagogy. And in those two experiences, I was blown away by your thoughtfulness and your design process. And then I started working with you on your thesis, and I hadn't seen anything yet. The level of the design process, level of resolution, and the amount of different scales that you looked at things really came up a lot in these comments. And I think that that was something that you explored throughout the thesis in a way that's really, really incredible. And the process over there is just, like 1/10 of what we saw. And I felt like every week I would suggest, oh, maybe you should look at the wall section, or maybe you should look at some perspectives, and then you'd come back with 20 perspectives and 8 different studies on wall sections. So the level of thoughtfulness is fantastic, and I think it's really demonstrated by the great work on the wall. It's been a true pleasure working with you. Congratulations. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
We're going to take about 5 minutes. We're going to be facing this wall. We need to do a little adjusting here. If you need to use a restroom, whatever.
You don't have to, I just like grab them and save them. Yeah. I was going to pull them out.
So I labeled it final. Yeah, I just started so far to final. So you saw that? Yeah. And it's there.
Yeah.
We're doing another building like a 500 seat patio. Yes, we had that giant one. Yes. It's got the mansion on the hill. Educate.
Yeah.
Something like yes, yeah, it's video amazing. We do like community centers, libraries, and then like, people have
I was like,
it was awesome. I feel like I really got into it from Madison.
I saw
Addison
the other day.
she said she might come in today.
She's printing something.
And she like planned everything out. I feel like I just got to go along and just be like, take you through.
She did it. Big and trip.
I'm so happy.
Maybe Greece next year.
Yes, for the summer. I feel like it's lovely.
How's it feel to be like a real person?
It was great. It's like
Maybe back in here, it's like a weird. It's just a weird.
yeah, a little trippy. I will say.
Yeah. But like you realize how much like your mindset was so different when you were like it's like you're so wrapped up in pieces, but the way you function as a human, you like rationalize things so much differently.
Just be aware of the
Yeah.
cables.
Yeah, I will have to step.
They're pretty big chicken hazard.
Yeah,
You gotta step this way, just go around.
got it. Perfect. Yep.
Okay, if we could try to head back to our seats. Can everybody see that okay? There's no complaints. Absolutely no complaints. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Okay, so good afternoon. This will be the final project that we'll look at this afternoon. Asma is going to take us to Yemen, specifically to Sotra, where we're going to discover something rather magnificent about a tree. Anyhow, her committee was composed of Michelle Lamprakos, Human Kolegi, and myself. Take it away.
Okay, just testing that you can hear me. Hello, everyone. I'm Esma Sofan. I'm really excited to be here. I feel like I've been dreaming about this moment since undergrad, so thank you for coming to my presentation. I'd like to start this off by thanking everybody who's ever helped out in this project and in this research journey to begin with, whether it's my wonderful chair, Michelle Lamprakos, who helped me kind of conceptualize what it wants to be and who it's for, as well as my committee member, Professor Kolegi, my family, of course, who's helped raise me to this moment, and the beautiful people who I've worked with both professionally and academically. Thank you so much. I can't begin to describe. All right, so with all that said and done, thank you for coming to my presentation. It is labeled Taking Root. It is a critical analysis on ecotourism that attempts to balance Socotra's sustainable development through a shift from ecotourism to agro-tourism. So this project is set in Socotra Island. It is an island offset of Yemen, its mainland. A little bit of background, I am from Yemen, and that is how this project spawned, more or less. My intention through this project is to take you to a world that I have grown really fond of, especially going through the architectural degree here in the US and figuring out how that can apply to kind of the different vernacular approaches that Yemen is very well versed in, and how you can kind of merge both my background and my education all in one. And this is more or less me taking you into my world, essentially. All right. So my thesis question began and continued to be, how can the application of sustainable architecture in Socotra, Yemen, set a model for ecotourism that preserves ecologies, meets user needs, and promotes local autonomy? Throughout this entire thesis project, I've critically analyzed 4 key terms within this question. That includes sustainable architecture, ecotourism, ecologies, local autonomy, because of how deep these terms can actually be represented when it comes to a land like Socotra, where different groups and different people need to be addressed, and how their lifestyles merge or are different from ours can like form a synergy, basically. So a bit of background, Socotra is a little island on the southeast of Yemen's mainland. It is around 200 miles southeast of Yemen, and the size of it is approximately 20 times the size of DC, if you'd like a reference. When you are introduced, or when Yemen is mentioned, typically what you can think of architecturally is the tower houses that are unique to Yemen, including the old city of Sana'a or old walled city of Shibam, which is considered the first Manhattan in history, basically, like a small civilization. However, I'd like to take you to a more different stance on Yemeni architecture, whereas the mainland features a lot of tower houses that are embedded within the landscape that kind of rise from the rocks and the mountains. Socotra is very different. It does not have many architectural character landmarks. When it does, it's more suitable to any Yemen's mainland location. It does not have an island motif or anything like that. It also takes in a lot of overseas styles as well. But Socotra is very small. It's just an island, and most of the means of architectural means are limited. And so what you end up actually seeing is a lot of landscape specific architecture in
groups that cannot be really labeled larger than villages. At most, you would have a capital town, and that's like the capital city of Socotra. But essentially, you have small villages that are clustered with community gardens. They have different walls and different thresholds within these properties. And the one thing to note about this project is the scale of it. Despite what my boards and my future drawings might kind of like deceive you into thinking, these are very small buildings. The essential requirements for spaces does not go beyond like needing a desk and giving that space to that desk, or any specific function in order for the people to utilize the space the way that they need. And so most of the structural grids, the houses that you will end up seeing don't really vary much from like a 12-foot, 24-foot extent, basically, or depth. What Socotra is famous for, why ecotourism is even a topic related to Socotra to begin with, is the fact that its nature is so exclusive to its landscape that it has become, or it has been designated as a World Heritage Site. So a third of Socotra's wildlife, plants, are only growing in the landscape, meaning that even if they are transplanted overseas, they fail to actually regenerate. 90% of the reptiles, 6 species of birds, as well as different landscapes, offer a lot of very minuscule yet very niche concepts of Socotra and what it holds. And all of these combined led to Socotra being a hub for ecotourism. This diagram showcases the typical route that you would take throughout the island, and that usually takes around 1 week. You would start first landing at the airport and then go through the capital town, Hadibo. After that, you will go through a whole journey, mainly consisting of camping accommodations, where you would see different bird species, different unique geological landscapes like white sand dunes, and especially the natural wildlife, including dragon blood trees. Now, keep in mind, that's just an important tree, as you can probably guess from the boards. However, regardless of the tourist activities, Socotra is actually closed off 6 months of the year because of its very drastic monsoon seasons. There is a northeast monsoon and a southwest monsoon. However, the southwest monsoon occurring in the summer is the most drastic, and it impacts the livelihood of the Socotris and tourists alike the most. This has also kind of catalyzed the island to being separate or unique to its own identity from the mainland of Yemen, because the fact it was so closed off for so long in history. Given the climate stressors, as well as different social and geopolitical stressors that have occurred throughout history, Socotra has faced a lot of kind of identity stressors or pressures, trying to figure out exactly what it wants to be and what it wants to represent, especially for the people and how they want to live throughout the land. However, regardless of where in history you would look at Socotra, its natural aspects have always been prominent. Ever since the beginning of time, or the beginning of cartography, where you have the first evidence-based map, the actual identification of Socotra is larger than it actually is, and at its center is the dragon blood tree. Following through, even when it has faced different backlashes politically from current events in Yemen, it has still prioritized conservation and environmental forethought at its front. And so what is this tree, and what does it really mean for the environment, and how does the environment really impact the people themselves aside from just the landscape? So the people are living by low means they are very fundamental people. Their lifestyles don't stray far from lifestyle requirements, including date cultivation, shepherding, hosting markets, fishing, and then one very prominent for the woman is lifestyle responsibilities in water collection. Another aspect is dragon blood resin. It is one of the biggest exports of Sumatra, but also one that is culturally relevant to the people as they see it as an icon for their own representation and not just an icon to serve the greater purpose, but it also helps them generate more income. Their landscape has enabled them to really understand how they can function within their space and how they can take people throughout their land. For example, ecotourism is the greatest generator for economic benefits for Sugatris, and that's because local Sugatris know where to take you. They are the ones who will drive you everywhere. They know which forest clearing is the best for eating, and they even have, it's low means enough that they allow their families to cook you dinner and then bring it in the camping grounds where the tourists from overseas can come and actually learn about the culture, about their cuisine. And in general, they're very well versed in their landscape. They're able to either butcher their caught fish of the day on the land. They also just are well versed in how they maneuver the monsoons and the different activities, but essentially they are most versed in the dragon blood trees cultivation and regeneration. So what is this dragon blood tree that I keep mentioning over and over and over again, and why is it so important for this island? It's important because it highlights the essential needs that the people need and what that can mean for them. The tree is an indicator of fertile land. The tree is an indicator for livelihoods. They are able to live around this tree, and it can indicate where water can be collected, which is very scarce in the island, given that it's a transitional desert island, as well as hosting different community gardens where they serve one another in different communities and neighborhoods. The tree in itself offers a wide variety of benefits throughout its lifespan. When it's growing, it offers livestock different opportunities for grazing, although that is not completely sustainable. They also offer resin extraction. Resin can also be medicinally beneficial to the island or to the Sugatris as well, as it can heal some infections, so on and so forth. Water collection, which I will get into. And then finally, it can also generate fuel wood or even construction logs for Sugatris after it's kind of died down in its fertility rate. So about its water collection and why it's called the dragon blood tree, opposed to the typical annual rings you would see with a tree, for example, like an oak tree, for example, the dragon blood tree has a very spongy interior in order to maximize its water collection and capture. The outer layer right outside its spongy layer is the dragon blood resin, and it basically acts as an immediate stress response. When its really harsh bark is injured, it releases or oozes out this dragon blood resin and it hardens. And from this hardening, this can either be turned into different modes of incense, or it can be the medicinal properties that I spoke on earlier. However, regardless of how beneficial this tree is and how active its system is in protecting it, it still falls short overall with the climate, as well as overmaturity and livestock grazing. For overmaturity, this tree is so well versed in its environment that it is able to live up to 500 years. But its fertility rate is not that long. That means that the older trees take on more resources that are scarce to younger seedlings. Another aspect is livestock grazing. When seedlings are able to actually be planted and grow, livestock are more palatable to the younger plants and end up eating those before they can actually bloom and regenerate the population. So Sugatris have taken that in their own hands and have formed the first of its kind dragon blood nursery. This is Adib's nursery, and it's in Hadibo, the capital town of the island. It was established in 1996, and it was only established because of a sponsor from Yemen's mainland who had the means to offer these facilities and these training programs to Adib. Adib basically runs this whole nursery with his family. It's him, his son, and his wife. His son was able to receive a scholarship from the Czech Republic in order to learn more about forestry, but he had to go overseas because they didn't have enough facilities. Once he came back, he was in charge of transplanting the younger trees and going through the island and taking in different aspects. Adib fears that the legacy will fall short once his family is not able to sustain this nursery. That is mainly because there are no facilities to teach the youth of Socotra how to regenerate their tree that they assume as their icon, because it has helped serve their communities and helped basically build the small villages that you see throughout the island. A little bit of intro to what I will propose to you. The proposal for my landscape is more kind of wild because I expect that it will be a transplant regeneration farm that is mostly site-specific, and I cannot predict that. However, what I can predict is that based on multiple various studies that I've looked into, there is an ideal rate at which these trees should be planted in order to have enough space and resources to share with one another. There are different rates where you can age these trees. For example, at 12 years, the tree is no longer palatable to livestock and so can be transplanted elsewhere in the island where it is exposed to goats and other cattle and not be threatened. And other aspects is that a 30-degree temperature is the ideal rate for these seeds to germinate. Once that occurs, that basically enables us or enables Socotris to regenerate their plant in a more scientific way that can be foolproof, basically, more or less. So here's the Thesis initiative. What I have chose to explore is a project that is grounded at environmental conservation. It is to regenerate the dragon blood tree and enable Socotris to take autonomy on their landscape. In doing that, I want to encourage communal engagement. This thesis aims to form a cohesive strategy where tourists and locals work together and not against one another in order to form a general understanding or knowledge exchange, cultural exchange about how this landscape works and how each of them can work together with their own backgrounds. This goes hand in hand with the critical analysis that I achieved earlier. The sustainable architecture, how do you make it specifically able or with low means enough that can be built on Socotra land? Ecotourism, what that means, what it wants to be, aside from just a mere showcase of what the landscape offers. Ecologies, how people, including locals and visitors, and how they interact with the landscape and how they interact with the architecture. And then local autonomy. How do you form this entire kind of cohesive strategy where the autonomy is still to the people of the land itself, and not kind of overshadowed by external entities, for example. So, to maximize this sustainable strategy for Socotra, this project exists in a village. It is a Dunawa village, 2.5 miles away from the capital, so it is still accessible to tourists and the general population, or most of the population of the island. The specific area is Ma'nufa. It's within the Adunawa village, but it's also run by a group of 100 women that basically care for a set of community gardens, and they allow tourists to come and tour in order to learn more about their landscape and how they generate their own livelihood. Another aspect for sustainable strategies to Socotra itself, this village is located in a cliffs, right underneath a cliffside or a mountainous range that protects us from the southwest monsoon. So at its strongest rate, the island will not completely be vulnerable to the southwest impacts. And so I present to you my master plan. I'd like to start this off with the initiative going hand in hand, and then I can introduce you to the general architecture. Essentially, it is the center, it's the Manufa Center for Socotra's Botanical Heritage, where Socotris, visitors, and researchers can all combine together in this regeneration project or master plan in order to learn from one another and also benefit the landscape itself. Going one by one for the general strategy, we have environmental conservation addressed by a research center where different labs can be built for germination of the seeds and for storage. Then we have communal engagement. We have to incentivize the locals as well as the visitors to interact with one another. And that can come from what is most beneficial to ecotourism's critique is housing communities that are still limited to employees who can own the land and can host visitors. This is to prevent any large-scale development of tourist strategies such as resorts or large-scale hotels in order to minimize the impact on the land of itself. The employees will also have, or the locals will also have more of a dominance on who gets to control the activities within these neighborhoods. And then at the center, you have different points of engagement, including a market, for example, and so on. And then we have knowledge sharing. Essentially, what this project aims to do is to create a cohesive or cohesive zone where the locals, the visitors, and the researchers of this dragon blood tree and the overall landscape of the island can engage with one another, can learn more about their craftsmanship, and so on. And here I present my final iteration of this project. Essentially, it is a master plan that combines all of those strategies that I presented before. I will take you through the different boards by mentioning basically how each critical analysis was addressed in this design and how it can continue to be analyzed. Essentially, this thesis was developed on a land that was also designed through flooded strategies for the monsoon seasons. It also took account how much space is required for this tree and what that can occur with the different communities and how that can impact the different communities. Using all of this, the local expertise that will eventually influence all the other critical analyses, we were able to develop this thesis that critically analyzes ecotourism and shifts it to agrotourism. So a more sustainable iteration of ecotourism is to find a benefit for the people and use that to maximize the engagement between locals and visitors. This is regardless of its placement in Socotra. This can be located wherever, as long as there's an incentive to the people. Then moving on to ecological balance. Finding a balanced strategy where the people and the visitors can all engage in the pursuit of bettering that environment, whether it's bettering their livelihoods or benefiting the landscape, so on and so forth. And then finally, we have the sustainable foundations, building with a means of affordability, building with a means of accessibility, and not just going above and beyond to form more flashy or hierarchical statements just like sustainability, but also what does it mean to the people? And in that can mean using local construction materials and techniques. It can also benefit from the different makeup and kind of organization of different elements. And with this, I welcome any questions that can delve deeper into how this architecture is laid out. And thank you. Got it. Yes, so the question was if I can speak on the two sections as well as the model making strategies. So most of this architectural project was developed with the tectonics of topography and what that represents for the island itself. The Yemeni architecture utilizes a lot of terracing in its architectural development, and it uses the topography and not really goes against it. One thing to note about these sections is that aside from the research center, all of the buildings kind of flow through with the topography that is generated by the different mountain ranges or the existing topography. However, the research center is embedded within the land in order to maximize its temporal control. Because 30-degree temperature is the most ideal in the germination of dragonblood trees, the embedded nature of this research center goes in hand with how Sugatris also conserve their food and how they control their temperature when electricity is scarce. Another way that this topographic manipulation was developed is through the use of my clay making strategies. So this is kind of a limited aspect of what I was doing as I was exploring the different ways this master plan wants to behave, but it is just generally generating a natural landscape and forming it with my own hand about how it wants to interact versus kind of assuming like an architectural kind of object to be placed, but instead moving with the clay and allowing it to control me as well. Yes, so section AA is taken from the overall frontal view of this axon, and it also goes with section BB that goes along this mountain range all the way through.
That's all I want to ask.
Repeat the question then so folks can hear it home.
Yeah. So the question was what the staggered walls are in section AA. And that representation is the walls or retaining walls that you can see forming from the top of this axon. One thing to note is that the mountainous range offers a strong influence or strong load onto the development itself. And so to minimize that, as well as to minimize the southwest monsoon flooding strategies, different retaining walls were utilized in order to kind of bypass that load, but also filter out the water in controlled ways where it can then form different channels through this farm and in turn give back to the community as well.
Can you show on the plan where the sections are again? Because I'm still not tracking. In particular, I'm not sure I understand where the underground center piece is.
So in plan, section AA is taken from this line and looking towards the general landscape. And so you would be seeing the different retaining walls. You would be cutting through this garden, this flooded garden, and then you would see the tourist agency that's located here. In section BB, this is taken from this angle where you would cut through the educational center at that point, and then also be looking into the embedded research center.
And where is the embedded thing? That's that.
Here. Yeah.
Okay.
And you're also welcome to pass this along. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you talk about the market and all the columns in there?
Yeah. So the reasoning for all the columns within this market space is to highlight the construction means of Socotra. And so this was taken from an iteration of a fish market in the capital town of the island. It is a small scale market intended for the Matnufa women. The Matnufa women also make clay pots and different textiles that can be sold to the locals as well as different tourists. And so the reasoning for this structure is because it could be a concrete structure, but it could also be a wood construction where they would utilize different logs and palm wood. And so with palm wood, that would be a 12-foot increment. And that is why the different columns are laid out in the way that they are, in order to allow for small vendor stalls, but also allow them to develop in their own means how big this structure can get.
I really like the scale of your project and how you're working with vernacular architecture of the place and of the nature. I think that the scale is a human scale, and it's not typical to do something of a human scale in a thesis project. So it's really nice to see, because I think that you can really get into the details and the space. And I think this project also shows the indoor and outdoor and how a lot of life is lived outdoor. Like the prayer space is all outdoors. The religious space and the spiritual space is nature. And I really loved learning about the dragon blood tree, and the picture that you showed of the people sitting under the tree on the carpets was kind of like, when I saw that, I was like, that's the most luxurious room.
Yeah.
So I'm imagining that the people that would come visit here would also take trips to the forest and get to experience all of that, because here you wouldn't have that kind of scale of tree, right?
Yes. So if you'd like me to answer that question, this is essentially a transplant regeneration farm. For the dragon blood tree, it can grow in this land, but it does not thrive. So the intention behind this farm is that it will be transplanted after its 12-year age to another location on the island. If you'd like to see the mountain topography model that I have, this indicates where this site is located in relation to all the different landscapes or landmarks of the island. So there is a hiking trail right behind these retaining walls that goes up the mountain and then into the Firmihan forest. The Firmihan forest is the most dense dragon blood tree. It's also the overmaturity picture you saw earlier. And that was intentional in also locating this village.
I'd be interested to see also, I see that in the conceptualization and the drawings, like the drawings are very beautiful. I'd like to see kind of like a technical exploration into one of the small units as kind of like a next step. What do you see happening on this site during the months that the tourists don't come, and when there's this extreme weather conditions of wind and monsoon?
Yeah. So the question was the activities that can occur when the island is closed off and tourists can't really engage with with the locals, and how life can behave within this master plan or location. Typically, Sukatris don't really go through a lot of transportation when the monsoon season hits, and they keep it very minimal to their local communities. That is the reasoning why there is a market space within this location that can be built on with the rest of the village to offer more produce markets, more essential needs markets. In addition to that, there are different retaining walls that are embedded within this site plan that act as bridge dams, where you can connect the housing communities with the overall kind of communal zones of this master plan that can be elevated more or less, but also allow the filtration of the water. As you can see throughout this like axon, where you can see this blue that kind of filters through the landscape. And especially on these kind of dips within the flooded garden, where you would still allow the elevation of the architecture to bypass the monsoon flooded, but also allow them to navigate their way throughout by foot.
So you've described this as an exercise in master planning, and we see that. Can you talk us through your thought process a little bit about the configuration of the buildings and how you were defining the outdoor spaces, the relationships that you were trying to make between the buildings?
Could you also explain the Center for Craftsmanship and Trade? I don't think we've heard much about that. I'm kind of curious how that relates to all the other pieces.
Got it. So the questions were how the different buildings were laid out to one another in relation to one another, and how the, sorry, can you repeat the second?
The Craftsmanship and Trade Center?
Yes, and then how the craftsmanship and trade programming can get involved with all of this master plan. So the different buildings actually took a variety of ways throughout the semester. Some ways were very axial, some ways were very organic, as you can see with the smaller models trying to find a way where it wants to communicate. Essentially though, the flooded condition was the one that really determined where they wanted to be. The programs for different buildings was separated based on their scale and how Sugatris typically construct. And then the needs for the program. What needs to be there? What does the village already have? And what can we offer to the village in order for it to be sustainable? And then taking all that into account and taking into account the different streams that exist within this site and the different swalets. These are analyzed from aerial photos as well as different research studies, and then figuring out where the water can be filtered, where there are retention zone potentials, and then offering a way that is more of low means for the people to build more like staggering walls in different locations that can still enable that. The second question, what the craftsmanship and trade programming is. So I mentioned that the women also configure different clay pots, and then they sell them to the locals and visitors. And so this is the Center for Craftsmanship and Trade. This is essentially a programming space where different locals and researchers and visitors can engage with one another and learn how different strategies for entrepreneurship can occur. It's a very similar construction to how schools are built in both the mainland of Yemen as well as Socotra, but also allows for the engagement of the outdoors to learn as at an outdoor classroom about how, one, you can either take care of different regeneration potential, how someone who is probably part of the youth can engage in entrepreneurial practices like constructing like a clay making studio or generating different activities in order to accomplish that.
So I think that the biggest trouble that I'm having with this is kind of a representational thing, because I'm looking at these little sketches that I could just kind of tell of the color of them and these things over here. Like there's so much thought. I mean, these are ridiculously good drawings. Like I mean, this diagram to me should be like one of the first things that you show, you know, and then there's these little perspectives of like how the architecture comes together and, you know, this one, and there's like a little tower and there's all this stuff. So you can clearly draw like, and yeah, they're ridiculous. And you can clearly draw, and there's a lot of like beautiful, restrained, subtle ideas about the things that you're making. Like I can tell that you're good at this, right? The problem is I'm having is just it appears you either ran out of time or you were like trying to blow up these sketches and like you blow up those little sketches to like this size and it kind of like I had to like figure out that you're really good based on all this other stuff, you know, and I think there's so much interesting stuff happening here. So I think it's representation, like when you do a drawing, super tiny drawing, when you blow it up, maybe it doesn't work the same way. So I think that these could benefit a lot from being more like using the tools that you have, the technology that you have to make them better, or you just have to be more rigorous about the way you're hand drawing. You know, same thing with the sections. Like those sections should be way better than they are, and I couldn't even figure out kind of where they are because you don't have, you know, some of the things shown on your plans. And just kind of going along. I mean, I love the idea of trying to design, you know, something for this place that means something to you, and thinking about it in a fresh way and a new way. And like, there's some of that stuff like this view here with like the gabion walls and the way that this like roof and the columns and stuff kind of connect to each other and how that plays out in section. It's like all there, but somehow it kind of falls apart in the way that it's executed. And I just want to stare at your little drawing some more.
Just to echo the part about the drawing, I mean, I think that that's true, and the passion for the topic and the site really comes through. It's intriguing, and I think I kind of I'm trying to understand the pieces.
Yeah.
So I go back to the part about the tourism. I assume that the tourist is going to come have an opportunity to engage. They're not necessarily staying here.
Yes.
They are. Okay, that's why I was asking about the other component, because it's not clear where there's people who are here, it's their village, and so on. But for the visitor, what's their experience when they arrive?
Yeah.
Where do they go?
Yeah. If you'd like, I can answer that. The question was how the tourists engage and if they have to stay or if they can be mobile throughout this different projects. The tourists are flexible in how they interact with this project. There is a scenario which is typical in Sugatra to be hosted in this village and stay for 2 days, maybe a week, and then be reliant on these locals to transport them back and forth to different areas that they want to see. But there is definitely a scenario where a tourist agency will meet tourists at the capital town and then transport them to this facility where they can learn to engage with the locals, either learn about how you can regenerate the dragon blood tree or learn about how the women have established their organization in the collaborative craftsmanship and trade program, and then move on in the same day to camping grounds in the Firmahin Forest. So it's a very flexible program, but yeah.
I think it's the tip of the iceberg, and I think there's an avalanche of work and of details which you've explored and drawn and thought about all through the semester. And I think the way you told the narrative was one narrative. Mm-hmm. And there's probably another like 10 narratives that could be told. So, and I think that other narrative would start with the master plan, which I think is a great drawing there to the left. And then the other drawing, which is the hardline drawings to the right of the overall floor plans. And I think if you could have diagrams that overlay that and tell the story of, you know, the tourist, or tell the story of the local, or tell the story of the forestry person, or tell the story of the biologist, or tell the story of the woman making a pot. Like all those different stories. So the multiplicity of visions is very clear, but it's not clear enough to, somebody who's just seeing the project for the first time.
I agree. Yeah. Thank
I love the story of the kind of, when I think about this project, I think about the architect as an entrepreneur.
you.
You know, like it makes me want to like do a project like this because it's like creating an autonomous community where there's the locals and there's the nature and the art that sustains them. And then you kind of tying it all together with this project, and it's at a scale that is doable. Doable on a local sense, doable by the community. So yeah, I would be interested to see where this goes. And yeah, I hope that it gets realized.
Thank you.
Can you say anything about what the next step would be for this project? Because I know you're directly in touch with people there.
Yeah. So yes, I am in touch with different secretaries, different architects that are also currently working on documenting Socotra's architectural character. It took me probably 2 months or 3 months to really figure out what kind of buildings exist in the island, aside from the villages that you would typically see in pictures. And I remember like having conversations with a few people in the audience right now. I was like, oh my God, I found this thing and someone's texted me and like, this is so cool. And I'm figuring out how their structure works. The next step for me, I believe that it took me a while to get into the nitty-gritty that you can see in the small diagrams that I've made beginning in the semester. And the comments that I've received are absolutely right in that it came down to the end of the semester. I need to fill up 4 to 6 boards, and there was so many comments of like, maybe you just need 4 boards. And I was like, no, but it's so much. Like I need to put it all in there and it needs to be big and you need to see that. But I do definitely agree now at the realization of it that it is a small scale project in that even the drawings and the representation that go along with it wants to be at a human scale and a small scale to address these minuscule details. My next step, if this is a passion project, I don't think I'll let down anytime soon, really going into the architectural rooms and studying how Socatris use their rooms, researching more about that, and in due time figuring out what all of these different spaces can mean and how they interact with one another, how their outdoor-indoor interacts. Not only based on what I've seen or what information I've been able to receive, but actually digging into their culture and their heritage. Because I myself have not been to the island, so I don't really know what it's like in that lifestyle.
So there is so much information in here and so much, such a deep thought process. And I think that in that case, clarity becomes even more essential. And I think that's some of what we're reacting to, figuring out where we are, how we're oriented, et cetera. And so in this case, sometimes we recommend people edit their architecture, but in this case, it's not editing the thought, but being super clear about what the primary thought is, what the subsequent thoughts are. But if you are taking this further, if you are presenting it in other settings, if you're there locally, tailor it to your audience. So today, it's an academic presentation for your thesis, but if you're presenting it to local authorities, figure out what's important to them, what they need, what information do they need in order to orient themselves and understand the project, because it'll be different for different people.
I agree.
I just wanted to do a little bit of myth busting. So Asma, there was no requirement whatsoever to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boards. Think about it for a second. What's the best meal you've ever had? Best restaurant you've ever been to? An all-you-can-eat place?
No.
No? Some of the best restaurants I've ever been to are like Michelin star restaurants where the portions are served exquisitely, like these little drawings, and the bill is extraordinarily high, much higher than anything you could get at an all-you-can-eat kind of restaurant. So I'm saying this not for you because it's a little too late, and yet we had also discussed this, and you're not in trouble. You're passing. That's not a problem. But I'm saying this for the people back there, is that you really ought to think, I'm very happy that Alec brought up this point because you've kept us just thrilled over the course of the semester with the production drawings. And that's just a tiny little sliver of the iceberg. And so I wonder, what would have happened if instead of accepting the idea that you have to take these damned Cronraths and cover them entirely with wallpaper, as somebody described it yesterday. But what if you had taken a plot that was maybe that beautiful plan and another maybe that beautiful plan over there, and then interspersed with a lot of the process to talk about, well, here's where I'm at the moment. This is where it's gone to, as opposed to trying to make this thing be something that's not supposed to be. I'll just say one other thing, is that architects often have their sweet spots in terms of where they operate best. Like I know for myself, when I draw, I don't like drawings that are any bigger, Matt knows this, any bigger than what I can see in front of me at a time. So they're usually about 9 by 9. Every once in a while, I'll do something that's 12 by 18, but I'm really out there. I'm really frightened about doing that. Architects are the same way. Some architects work well at the scale of a house. Charles Gwathmey, one of the old New York 5 architects, built beautiful houses. The minute he did a big building, it was a dog, right? So, I mean, know what you're good at. And I'm really happy that Alex said that, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I'm even looking at the photographs, and Nooni said that one photograph is like, or I think it was you who said that, so beautiful. And you have these little vignettes, I feel like the scale of this to me, like who's flying over top of this thing looking at it, really? And so to me, what the power of it is the kind of seductiveness of the plan and this idea of the water and how the plan responds to that, and then it's a very episodic thing, where you like you should have your plan and then like 18 little vignettes that we walk through the space, because I think you spent so much time also in your presentation talking about the story and the narrative, and then at the very end you're like, okay, here's the project, right? And really the project is trying to resolve the narrative, and you could have used the vignettes to talk about the experience of a person without us having to ask you to explain it.
Microphone is here. So can everyone hear me? Yeah. So we've had so many conversations about this, and I completely agree with you, Brian. I mean, we've talked about where did this convention come up with the 5 Conrads anyway? Like, my thesis, your thesis could probably have fit, right? No. Yeah, what I'm saying is that to Asma's credit, she really tried to translate that in very little time. And it's difficult to be the first one to break with the 5-6 Conrad scheme, right? So all of you out there listening, there is now precedent for breaking with that. And what I imagine, so there's 2 alternatives. One is to go smaller and process oriented, like you've been hearing from Alec and others. The other is to literally, you get up on your ladder and do something like the Ghanaian sculptor El Anatsui, where he makes this little metal tapestry, where it just becomes this overwhelming, beautiful hand-drawn tapestry.
Yeah. I agree with everyone. I just want to add that I think that the most successful graphic representations here are those kind of like in between drawing sketches. Yeah. And And I even love like the Arabic calligraphy. Like I would even want to see like the calligraphy. I do calligraphy, but I would like to see the calligraphy done also by hand, not by the computer, and like maybe like integrated abstractly into everything.
Yeah.
That's another story. That's just an art thing. But I think that if you had more kind of like representations of these moments, that it would really kind of succeed in taking us there. I think the least successful drawing is this biggest one.
Okay.
Like what I really like about it is the landscape part of it, the marker part. That really works. But then the way that the drawings are, I think it does a disservice to your drawings.
Okay.
I mean to what you're trying to get across,
yeah.
because the level of detail at that scale kind of like it's not, something's off.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, having a plan is enough for us to understand the concept, and also these really nice sections are very beautiful. So just having those moments, I think that would tie it all together for a future presentation. And also I just had one really quick off-topic question. The 30 degrees is Celsius, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was like, there's no way that that's Fahrenheit.
No, not Fahrenheit, definitely Celsius.
Yeah, just beautifully drawn thesis. And I, I concur with all the comments about the representation. And I would, on your plan is beautiful, and that's a hard line drawing, but I've looked at a lot of plans. I was confused. That second floor, I thought was another building. And so the kind of the subtlety of the courtyard is confused by that second floor. Further, the confusion on where the section cuts are, you should have two plans, and I would do a lower plan, because on this plan, the submerged room, we should just be seeing the roof. And then you should have a second plan that's mostly poche of that lower courtyard. That would have helped me and Alec out a lot in figuring out where these sections were cut. But, you know, those are minor comments, you know, on a large, very beautifully drawn project.
You know, students oftentimes screw up color in drawings. I find myself all the times going around saying, you really want to use that much color in there? But in this particular case, I think your use of color does a very good job of explaining the general climate and what this place is like, you know, and I think that that's an important part of the thesis. I think this is clearly a love letter to something you have an emotional attachment to.
Yeah.
Which I greatly admire, you know, because if we can take the things that are really important to us, like architecture and where we came from and what has meaning for us in terms of a spot on the earth, and find a way just to take a journey to learn more about those places and learn in the process, learn more about ourselves, I think that's a very valuable lesson there, no matter, you know, whether, and the specifics of the project, when you think about it in those terms, don't really matter very much, you know. I do think, though, one thing that would help in a project like this, because this is such an uninhabited place, you know, and the scale is so vast, and I kind of knew what you were doing this semester, but I didn't know what you were doing this semester by talking to you. But it's just such a hard thing to wrap your arms around, this whole scale of the culture and everything. I think one thing that would help would be to be more deliberate about typology and the distinctions you could make about the kinds of buildings you make and how they operate typologically.
Yeah.
Because it would give a clearer indication about the functions of these little settlements and things. And I look at those buildings, aside from the two-story building, which I guess is the hostel or something like that. Is that the two-story building? What is that?
More or less, that's where the craftsmanship and trade classrooms would be.
Okay. Can't really tell that easily, you know, and I think that would help the project to be able to have a better kind of, it could be quite simple, iconographic program, whether things are square, they're long rectangles, or whether they repeat in a group and things like that. It's a sort of thing that I think we we undervalue. You know, Corbu said, what are the, Brian, you know the quote about the centuries have filled our hands, but I prefer washing. So he understood that in his modern architecture, the role of the iconographic type and things. So that's something I think as you begin to look at these societies and try and understand them and make them part of your understanding of you and architecture, I think understanding the role that that plays would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, Professor Lamprakos, you're up.
Thank you.
Okay. So I really appreciate all the great comments. I'm sure Asma does too. Have a long conversation afterwards. Want to echo what you just said, Matt, about being clear about typology, and I would extend that to typologies of open spaces, which is something that your committee member, Human Koliji, back in the back, really emphasized. So I think that could also be taken to the next step. So this is also very emotional for me. As you know, I lived in Yemen for almost a year and a half. I wrote my first book on it and fell in love with the people and the architecture, and have been very pained at the civil conflict that Yemen has been embroiled in. It's been at the crosshairs of geopolitics for a long time, most of the 20th century, and right now there are US bombs dropping on Yemeni civilians. So it's a very emotional thing. The conclusion, main conclusion of my book was that what makes heritage different in Yemen is that it's alive. And I think you really, really showed that in this really remarkable project. You really tried to get at the point that it's, yes, this incredible architecture, incredible ecology, but it's generated by people and living knowledge. And you really were insistent that you're not going to let this be taken over by outsiders. And that includes educated Yemenis, right?
Yeah.
Or other Arabs. It's going to be a local phenomenon, and the local knowledge that produced and cultivates this heritage remains theirs, and that there's a sort of joint collaboration in keeping this heritage alive. So thank you so much for all you've taught me and your inspiration.
Thank you.
So these reviews happen because a lot of people do work over and above the call of duty, and I want to make sure that we recognize them. First and foremost, the reviewers that were here today and yesterday, they take time out of their professional practice. They take a pause. This doesn't have a job number, probably. And they come and they donate their expertise to the discussion. And for those of you that are alums, this does not count as a donation, however. We're going to hit you up on that at a different point. So thank you to you. Thank you to the incredible TSC staff who, when I came in, yes, dealt with the fact that we often forget to flatten out PDFs and then we pin them up in the wrong place. And those guys, when they came in first thing this morning, were moving everything all around. I was really impressed by that. I also want to thank the folks in Student Services, Brenda DeCoster and Kristen Stack, who are the ones that technically get you guys out of here and graduated. And they're supervised by Lindsay May back there. And it's really important to know that they're doing all they can at the moment. For some of you that might have ambiguities, we're working on that. I want to thank Yelena, Maggie, and company, because we've been, in addition to the broadcast on YouTube and Facebook, we've had posts on Facebook and Instagram that make us all look really quite sophisticated and fantastic, particularly when we set up things in less than 5 minutes for the run of a reel or something. And then this will hit pretty close to the faculty and to the guests. Zach Sims had his first 2 days of learning how to feed us at lunchtime, and he did a remarkable job, particularly today's lunch. We had a wonderful Korean lunch that left my mouth so activated with spice that I could barely talk. Hey, look, what if instead of thinking of the thesis final reviews as a job for a wallpaper company, what if we thought about it as a hanging of pictures in the museum? And that changes, we still use the same Cronraths, but that might change the way, and that means the pictures have to be good. But that might change the way we think about these things. And I just do encourage those of you that are someplace in the pipeline, whether you're an undergraduate or a graduate student about to do Architecture 600 and see thesis as far off, is that you think about and talk to your faculty members and to your colleagues about how you might be able to challenge things so that we're not just doing a hollow ritual, and that we're actually doing something that is meaningful every step of the way. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing I want to say is that unbeknownst to the students, unbeknownst to most of the students, several of the students have been very engaged in this conversation, but we've been having a lot of meaningful soul searching as a faculty about thesis this past year plus. And the faculty had made a series of really good suggestions about how to improve thesis to make it better down the line. Some of those are going to be things that we can implement immediately. And since I will be heading up Architecture 798 again in the fall, I'm going to take as many of those suggestions into account. I've had a wonderful time working back and forth with Julie and Human, who have actually really brought 797, which is the thesis prep course, into a really good shape. So I'm excited about that. And so I just wanted to say that, and Peter and I will be working to revamp this so that next year, it's not gonna be exactly the same, but hopefully it's gonna be very different. Hopefully it'll be more humane for the faculty, more humane for the students. And for those of us that put in the time on this, Eric, who's at home, will tell you that this is like teaching 3 courses in terms of contact time. So it's something to think about. Hey, earlier this morning, about 5 a.m., I got up and I was doing some email, and I happened to be on, what's it called, LinkedIn, because somebody wanted to network, and which, by the way, students, anybody, if you ever want to network with me on LinkedIn, I have a huge network, happy to do that with you, so you can figure out who you want to get jobs from. Don't ask on Facebook or Instagram, though, I don't do that. But there was an article, and the article was titled, "Unpopular Opinion. The PhD is supposed to be hard, grind away," by somebody named Jason Thatcher. And I read it because I have at home a partner who's doing a PhD, and he's at that point where, it's threatening and hard. So I've modified this for us. Unpopular opinion, the Master of Architecture is supposed to be hard, grind away. And this is not so much for you guys. You can just commiserate in the story, but it's for the folks in the back who might be doing this next year. Somewhere along the way, a dangerous myth took hold in graduate school culture, that if your Master of Architecture feels overwhelming, exhausting, or lonely, something must be broken. That if you don't have work-life balance, something must be broken. It's not broken. It's a Master of Architecture. A professional degree in architecture is supposed to stretch your intellectual, emotional, and professional limits. It's not just about producing research or pretty pictures. It's about learning to survive ambiguity, failure, slow incremental process over the semesters without constant validation. Here's a hard truth. Give me 1 second. And Jason, if you're watching on Facebook, my apologies. No one can fix the fundamental difficulty of this path. That might be a good lesson for faculty to think about too. Not your advisor, not your department, not your mental health resources. Support matters, but the work is still work. Before you post another thread about how unfair it all is, ask yourself, did I expect to be celebrated before I produce something meaningful? This is why I don't applaud at undergraduate reviews or at any other reviews but here, because they haven't earned anything. Am I seeking support or am I seeking permission to disengage? Am I confusing a hard process with a broken system? Yes, academia has serious problems. Yes, students deserve respect and humane treatment, but the day-to-day grind, the solitude, the revisions, the tough feedback, the slow climb towards competence is part of the deal. So you don't have to love it every day. Put that chocolate on there. But you have to survive if you want to earn the degree. And you guys have survived, those of you that have completed it. The students who make it are really the ones who coast through untouched. They're the ones who got knocked down, kept moving anyway. They're most often, maybe not the most smartest, I disagree with him on that. I think we have the smartest students. But they were students with a work ethic, and that is really, that's key. So before you vent, ask yourself, is this complaining about a real injustice, or is it something I simply have to push myself through? And if it's the latter, drink some coffee, open your laptop, pick up a pencil and tracing paper, and get back to work. Your future self will thank you, because once you have your Master of Architecture, no one can take it away. And guess what? You guys are about to get it. So thanks a lot, folks. Have a great summer.